And continuing our coverage right here on ABC News Live, as you just heard, Frank James, the suspect in the New York City subway shooting, is now in custody. As David just mentioned, we are currently awaiting a press conference from NYPD with more information. We have live coverage and live team coverage when that happens. But right now, we also have ABC News contributor and former FBI agent Brad Garrett joining us, along with ABC News White House correspondent Mary Alice Parks. Brad, we cut you off before that special report there. You said you were not surprised that they were able to catch their suspect within 30 hours of that incident.
So if you think about the number of clues and evidence that he left at the scene, credit card, weapon, the smoke canisters, the ones he didn't use, fireworks. He parks a vehicle not far from where NYPD believes he entered the subway system. The credit card they found at the scene of the shooting rented that U-Haul. I mean, it's just all of these pieces of information. The reason I'm repeating that is that he's not going to be any more careful as he leaves the scene and tries to maybe potentially hide or move around New York. And the idea that he was not in New York anymore clearly is possible, but what means does he have? His vehicle was taken, the U-Haul. Of course, he could have another car. How much money does he have? He doesn't have a credit card anymore. So all these things limit you if you're a fugitive running from the police. And so because there's so much media coverage, and New Yorkers kept their eye out and obviously spotted him. Police got the information, and they, it sounds like that they made an arrest. So all of that makes sense to me. And as I said earlier, it doesn't surprise me that he got into custody so quick.
And you mentioned that some eagle-eyed residents were the ones who helped catch the suspect. Let's turn to investigative reporter Aaron Katersky, because, Aaron, we know that the suspect was spotted in the East Village, you just reported.
He was wandering around the East Village in the area of St. Mark's Place and First Avenue, Kenneth. And bystanders simply saw him, realized who it might have been, and started snapping pictures. And when they started taking those pictures, they put them up on social media. The NYPD saw the photos. They responded to the scene, swarmed the area, and they were able to take Frank James into custody. We're waiting to see what charges he is going to face, but he had been wanted for the attempted murder of 10 people on the Manhattan-bound N train. The question will be, is this a federal crime, perhaps some kind of terrorism crime or something else, or will this be prosecuted locally by the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office? And we're waiting to find out. But Frank James is now in custody at the nearby police precinct, and a number of officers responded to that. They had been looking for this man for hours. It had drawn the attention of several states where he has addresses associated with Ohio, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. He bought the gun in Ohio legally in 2011. He purchased a gas mask on eBay. Authorities had his credit card, so they were able to look at some of those transactions and help identify him as the suspect.
That credit card, Aaron, being left at the scene there, it seems like that was the key piece of evidence that led them to identifying a person of interest and then eventually a suspect.
It was certainly one of them, because when you have the credit card, you can see what that credit card buys. And they found that it rented a U-Haul in Philadelphia, and that U-Haul was found 4 miles from the crime scene and near an entry to another subway station on the N line, where it's believed that Frank James boarded on Tuesday morning. They saw him on surveillance video wearing the orange and yellow construction-style vest that eyewitnesses later described, and they also have him on video exiting one of the subway stations. I don't know which one, but they were able to track his movements. And once the NYPD was able to reconcile some discrepancies in the height description that eyewitnesses gave, combined with the purchase history on the credit cards, that made them increasingly confident they had their man.
We've been talking, Aaron, about the tense situation there in New York City among commuters, among residents, people, again, taking the New York City subway here. They had to go through evening rush, as our Janae Norman just mentioned. Can you talk about how intense this investigation has been to find this man?
This has been the most urgent priority in the city over the last 24 hours or so. As soon as this happened, police began urgently looking for images, descriptions, and finally, once they were able to get that, they circulated them to officers all across the city and eventually to the U.S. Marshals Fugitive Task Force because they were curious. Was he going to strike again? They didn't think that he had anything more on him, but they didn't know for sure. They had his credit card, they had his phone, they had his vehicle. So effectively, he was off the grid, and they couldn't use a lot of the electronic tools that police would ordinarily use around here to try and track suspects. So they had to do it the old-fashioned way, putting out notices of a name, pictures, and those pictures seem to have made a difference because it was bystanders capturing images on their cell phones that led police to this suspect in the East Village here in Manhattan.
And Brad, we now are focusing obviously on this suspect's state of mind. You know, we know that there was mumbling, rants on social media. So for investigators here, what's their next step as they try to potentially question this suspect who many question his state of mind and to see if he was even of sound mind and body when he was captured?
So the key with suspects like Mr. James is it's been my success, so to speak, in getting people to talk is you go in sort of soft. In other words, you talk to Mr. James on a level of, how are you? Do you need food? Have you used drugs recently? Is there anything I can get you? And you then get him, you go from that to then talking about himself. I mean, tell us about yourself. You know, you don't get into the crime maybe for an hour or two. It just really depends on Mr. James. But once he starts talking, if in fact he starts laying out the reasons and the steps that he went through to commit this crime, you have to let him go. Because people, it appears, like Mr. James, have their own reality as to why they did this. You don't want to ridicule that. You don't want to make fun of it. You don't really want to jump him over it. You really want him to tell the story. Because in his mind, Kenneth, he was justified in doing this. That's totally illogical, obviously. But in his mind, he believes that, I think, that, and again, based on his social media posts, that it was okay to do this because basically NYPD wasn't doing enough via crime in the subway. And he even makes a comment in one of those posts that he just felt like going out and shooting people. And so I would ask him that. You know, it looks like you wrote this. Did you write it? Then he'll probably say yes if he does. Now, what does that mean? And let him describe in his reality what happened, because he'll give you all the pieces of information. You just have to let him do it in his context, because it doesn't matter what his context is. He did it, and he's admitted doing it. You know, what will have to be sorted out later, way beyond what law enforcement is going to do, is he competent to stand trial?
And Brad, as we await that news conference by the NYPD and other city officials there, we assume that the Mayor Eric Adams will join virtually there. I'm curious about, you know, as we wait to learn the details here about exactly how he was found. It does appear that it was the citizens, eagle-eyed residents of New York City, who were the ones who were responsible for IDing the suspect and alerting police. What does it say about the fact that it wasn't, you know, police who happened to spot him and track him down, that it was the citizens of New York?
Well, one of the things that Aaron mentioned was so spot on in that there was no other way to apparently track him. There wasn't a known cell phone. There wasn't a good address in the New York or surrounding area for him. But when you look at, does he have the ability to actually move someplace else outside of New York? The answer is probably not. And so what you do is you flood the public, and you know, New York's a perfect place because obviously it's so dense and people communicate more in bigger environments and they're aware of things more maybe than they are in more urban or suburban environments. And so as a result, everybody's talking about Mr. James and they have a picture of him or it's in their phone, in their tablet, whatever. And so that's what caught him. And it's such an important statement to make that the public are so critical in solving crime. And that's why the relationship between the police and the community has to have some cohesion to it. That's the real key here. And it certainly looked like it happened in this case.
And Aaron, you've got some new information about how James will be charged. It looks like there will be some federal charges here.
That's what it's looking like, according to a law enforcement official I just spoke to, Kenneth, that Frank James is going to be charged with federal crimes, in all likelihood terror-related offenses. The authorities at first weren't sure what to make of this. They saw some potential ideological motivations. They saw some psychiatric issues in this particular 62-year-old suspect. But it's been decided now that he is in custody, that he will face federal charges in the Eastern District in New York, in Brooklyn, where the subway attack occurred. It's just a matter of now getting him processed by the NYPD in the precinct and then getting him moved into federal court. That may not be a short process, but that's how he is going to be charged, we're told. He had been wanted for the attempted murder of 10 people on the subway, but remember what he had with him: fireworks, smoke grenades, a hatchet. So he had a number of weapons on mass transit that he used to certainly terrorize a number of commuters toward the end of the morning rush on Tuesday.
And we also have Tom Bossert, ABC News contributor, with us as well. Tom, you hear that latest reporting there from Aaron Katersky. What do you make of that and the fact that we have federal charges?
Well, I'm pleased to hear it. I'm really glad that this, danger to society is off the streets. I think there's going to be a lot of charges brought against him, rightly so. But I still think that the primary charges of real merit that will end up landing him in jail for the longest will be the charges that are brought under state law. I'm glad the federal government will join. There'll be a lot of prosecutors lined up trying to get their hands on him in order, in sequence, to make sure that as many charges as can be brought are brought, so that he's not only held accountable, but held in detention for as long as possible.
And Chief Justice Correspondent Pierre Thomas. Pierre, this was an intense manhunt here for about 30 hours for Frank James.
It was indeed. And, you had the FBI involved, you had ATF, the U.S. Marshals involved. It was just a matter of time before this person of interest, then who turned into a suspect, was brought into custody. And Kenneth, one of the things that we're finding this case was classic law enforcement putting the pieces together. For example, gun recovered at the scene. They were able to trace back to a Ohio purchase in 2011. Phantom Fireworks is confirming that the fireworks were bought by Mr. James from their business. Witnesses who were shown the pictures that had been released by authorities said, yeah, that's the person who was on the subway platform. So it was building block piece by piece that led to them to identify him as a suspect. And once you get that kind of information out to so many sources, and New Yorkers were sensitized to this case, it was a matter of time.
And Pierre, when these types of incidents happen, when these mass shootings happen, I feel like there's always that debate over the use of the word terrorism. And people demanding, obviously communities demanding, that a person or a suspect be charged with terrorism if there's a mass shooting. What do you make of these federal charges that are terror related?
Well, the federal government would always look at its interests in this case. If the facts allow them to bring terrorism charges, that's something that they will do. I will not also be surprised if the city and the state want to bring charges as well. So you can often have parallel, investigations and prosecutions going on at the same time because they want safeguards. They want to make sure, in a case like this, where they feel like they have the right person, that this person is held to account and brought fully to justice.
Pierre, earlier I asked about the state of mind here for this suspect. What happens next between investigators and the suspect, Mr. James?
Well, clearly now, as Brad said, they will want to talk to him, see if he will talk, to see if he will confirm what they believe they have evidence to prove. That's going to be key. The other thing is they've been looking very closely at these social media posts, and the picture that's emerging is of a person who was extremely angry, unmoored, if you will, a person who was angry about the mayor, angry about homelessness. He was just, as one source last night, he was just damn angry. And that is a question, is how much did that motivate him? Are there questions of undiagnosed mental health issues? And, you know, there are some postings suggesting that he was planning to commit acts of violence. And that may speak to the notion that we really aren't a police state. And did people see those postings and not contact law enforcement?
And Tom Bosser, at a federal level here, what next steps, would you expect after an incident like this at the federal level when it comes to how DHS, the FBI, how they respond, how DOJ responds?
Yeah, there's a number of things that'll happen here from the DHS perspective. Certainly, they'll look through the procedures, what went well, what didn't go well, where they could offer additional assistance. From a Department of Justice perspective, they'll not only do an after action of the operational coordination between the FBI and local law enforcement, which seems to have gone very well here, but they'll nevertheless look through it to see if there's ever anything they can do to improve. And then from a prosecutorial perspective, domestic terrorism really occupies a gray area in federal law. And so what I think will happen is that the federal prosecutors will look through Title 18 of the United States Criminal Code, Section 2331. There's a number of different offenses there that will probably be cobbled together in some appropriate manner once the investigators lay the facts out against all the predicate requirements for each of those particular federal violations. And they will bring together something that looks like terrorism-related charges. But again, it's a little different, and you've heard a lot of debate on it after January 6th. Whether the United States needs a additional specific domestic terrorism statute. For right now, as I said, it's a gray area, but there is sufficient statutory basis to charge him federally, in my view, and I certainly expect that they will. And then lastly, I think we'll have to look to see if he was just one lone angry actor or whether there were other people sharing his anger, as Pierre said, that he might have collaborated with, coordinated, or planned this with, that might now still be at large and represent a risk of doing something similar in their cities.
And Aaron, I'm sure at this point investigators are trying to piece together the large ground that was covered here by this suspect. I mean, I'm looking at the notes here: Wisconsin, Philadelphia, New York City. Again, he covered a lot of ground here.
He covered a lot of ground, and he's 62 years old. He does not, though, have any meaningful felony arrests in his background that authorities have been able to uncover so far. Some misdemeanor arrests, they seem to be a bit older, so he's been in and out of the criminal justice system, but we're not sure that any of that was typically meaningful or would have presaged what happened on Tuesday morning in the subway. But it is just extraordinary, Kenneth, how police were able to get him. It was old-fashioned police work, putting information out to the public and getting that information back in once somebody spotted the suspect and took pictures of him.
We're just a couple of minutes away from this NYPD New York City official press conference. Before we get to that, White House correspondent Mary Alice Parks, have we heard anything from the White House? We know President Biden spoke about this yesterday.
Yeah, yesterday he really congratulated and applauded the work of law enforcement, but there's going to be a lot of follow-up questions now about why he was at large for so long, why he was able to leave the scene, and whether or not there were gaps in the system. I imagine that there's going to be serious investigations into why there weren't cameras operating in these subway stops, several subway stops that he seems to have passed through. The president so far has not talked a lot about this over the last 24 hours. I imagine that we'll hear from the White House at some point today, now that he has been placed into custody, now that this sort of immediate manhunt has come to a bit of an end. And we're going to hear from the president, too, about these federal charges. But look, taking a step back, kind of a 30,000-foot view politically, the president's facing a big challenge across the country with rising crime in cities and a real fear from these cities about whether or not people are going to come back to cities. Cities are dependent on money from tourism, money from office workers that post-pandemic have really been struggling to kind of right themselves. And you can imagine that this is just another moment, such a big headline, such a national story, another moment that could give Americans a pause. And that is a big concern for this White House. It's trying to figure out how to make sure cities can, across the country, coast to coast, are figuring out how to stand themselves back up after the pandemic.
Tom Bossert, especially to Mary Alice's point, when it comes to transit systems, there are a lot of eyes, once again, on the safety of transit systems in this country.
Yeah, it's unacceptable to me that those cameras were out. There's a lot of money and resources that go into securing these facilities for a reason. I'd like to find out why they were out, whether it was an acceptable excuse or whether it was really neglect. There's a number of those things that are going to come out of a kind of a post-mortem inspection or investigation into how everything happened, what went right, what went wrong. And to her point, there's a trend here where we've got increasing gun violence in multiple cities across this country. New York's reported, I think, year-over-year increases in gun violence for the last several years, even though their homicide rates have gone down a little. But that's in many ways a testament to the fact that the shooters have not been as accurate or that the medical care has been so good. I'm super proud of the consequence management community of which I'm a part, and I'm really proud of the law enforcement investigatory work in its outcome. But I'm a little bit concerned that there needs to be more, and there needs to be a consistent message across these cities. And I do believe this president's going to own a lot of that today because it's perceived that he's in or representing the party in control in a lot of these big urban areas. And they're going to have to come up with some unified voice, whether it's a law and order message or whether it's a leniency message. And I think that'll be more politics than anything. But I'll be looking for it today. Sometimes prose matters, but really policy and investment matters. So what we'll look for over the coming weeks and months is whether this president's willing to help these cities follow through in the real budget dollars and training dollars that their police need.
All right, and let me cut you off because we are going to a special report here.
An ABC News special report. Now reporting, David Muir.
Good afternoon. We told you we would be back on with the breaking news here in New York City. The NYPD about to brief on this arrest just moments ago. Frank James now in custody after that mass shooting on a New York City subway here. The images just coming in of that arrest a short time ago. Sources telling ABC News he was found in the East Village of New York. A tense more than 24 hours here in New York. But they say they have their man now. He is in custody, and let's listen in to New York City Police Headquarters.
The first moment of this incident, and we have important information to transmit today. First, I would like to go to the mayor, live from Gracie Mansion.
My fellow New Yorkers, we got him. We got him. I cannot thank the men and women of the New York City Police Department enough, as well as our federal agents, our state police, our first responders, from the 9/11 operators to the various men and women from our medical professions. We got him and said to New Yorkers, we're going to protect the people of this city and apprehend those who believe they can bring terror to everyday New Yorkers. And I want to thank everyday New Yorkers who called in tips, who responded, who helped those passengers who were injured. 33 shots, but less than 30 hours later, we're able to say, we got him. Thank you, Commissioner, for your leadership and job well done.
And now, Police Commissioner of the City of New York, Keyshawn Sewell.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here. I am truly fortunate to stand here among these extraordinary investigators and federal partners to make this announcement. Moments ago, Frank Robert James was stopped on the street and arrested by members of the New York City Police Department. Officers, in response to a Crime Stoppers tip, stopped Mr. James at 1:42 p.m. at the corner of St. Mark's Place and First Avenue in Manhattan. He was taken into custody without incident and has been transported to an NYPD facility. He will be charged with committing yesterday's appalling crime in Brooklyn. I want to commend all of the investigators and analysts who took part in this all-hands-on-deck investigation. Literally, hundreds of NYPD detectives worked doggedly during the last 30 hours to bring this together. They did so in tandem with a vast number of our law enforcement partners, including those from the FBI NYPD Joint Terrorism Task Force, the ATF NYPD Crime Gun Intelligence Center, and the Regional Task Force led by the United States Marshal Service. We hope this arrest brings some solace to the victims and the people of the city of New York. We used every resource at our disposal to gather and process significant evidence that directly links Mr. James to the shooting. We were able to shrink his world quickly. There was nowhere left for him to run. I'd like to turn it over to Chief James Essick for details of the investigation.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to update the public on yesterday's incident on the subway in Brooklyn on a Manhattan-bound N train. Through the course of this investigation, we developed additional information and evidence. Mr. Frank James, our person of interest, now became a wanted individual for yesterday's horrific incident. Mr. James is a male, 62 years old. He is known to us and has ties in Wisconsin, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and New York City. His arrest history in New York is 9 prior arrests, dating from 1992 to 1998. Those include possession of burglary tools 4 times, criminal sex act, theft of service 2 times. He was arrested on a New Jersey warrant. He also has a criminal tampering. He has 3 arrests in New Jersey, in 1991, 1992, and 2007. They are for trespass, larceny, and disorderly conduct. So yesterday, we recovered video of him prior to the incident entering the Kings Highway subway station. He has the same black cart that he has later recovered on the crime scene. The pictures are to my right over here. This
We'll make these available electronically after this.
This station is 3 blocks from where we recovered the U-Haul truck that he rented in Philadelphia. The key to that truck was recovered at the crime scene. This jacket, the distinctive orange jacket, was also recovered, as well as his construction helmet he was wearing, and we recovered that in a garbage bin in transit. We believe, but this is still early in the investigation, that after firing his weapon 33 times at innocent New York City subway riders, Mr. James boarded an R train that had pulled into the station, went 1 stop up, and exited at 25th Street Station. We also have a picture of that. The gun used in this, a 9mm Glock, which was recovered at this crime scene, was purchased by Mr. James in 2011 in Ohio. We tracked Mr. James, and his last known whereabouts was 7th Avenue and 9th Street in Park Slope, entering the subway. Minutes ago, thankfully, NYPD patrol officers from the 9th Precinct responded to St. Mark's and 1st Avenue, where they apprehended him without incident. This case was quickly solved using technology, video canvassing, and then getting that information out to the public. So I can't speak highly enough of the partners we had, the FBI, Mike Driscoll, ATF, John DeVito, U.S. District Attorney from Easton, Breon Peace, and the coordination within the Detective Bureau. Tommy Galati from Intel, our Transit Bureau, our Patrol Services Bureau. Phenomenal job, less than 30 hours later to arrest this individual. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Breon Peace.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Yesterday was a dark day for all of us, but the bright spots of the incredible heroism of our fellow New Yorkers helping each other in a time of crisis, the quick response by our first responders, and the hard work by all of our law enforcement partners that has been ongoing is truly a bright spot here. Today, Frank James has been charged by complaint in Brooklyn Federal Court with one count of violating 18 U.S.C. sections 1992 A7 and B1, which prohibits terrorist and other violent attacks against mass transportation systems. He has been apprehended. He will be arraigned in federal court in Brooklyn, and if convicted, he will face a sentence of up to life imprisonment. My office is prepared to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that on April 12, 2022, in Sunset Park, Brooklyn, in the Eastern District of New York, Frank James did knowingly and without lawful authority and permission commit an act, including the use of a dangerous weapon, with the intent to cause death and serious bodily injury to passengers and MTA employees on the New York City subway system. The government will prove, among other things, that James traveled across state lines in order to commit the offense and transported materials across a state line in aid of the commission of the offense. We, in the Eastern District of New York U.S. Attorney's Office, are working closely with all of our law enforcement partners, the FBI, NYPD, ATF, U.S. Marshals Service, and others, including the Kings County District Attorney's Office. And my office and our law enforcement partners will use every tool at our disposal to bring this individual justice and bring justice to New Yorkers and restore safety and peace of mind to all. And we'll continue to do so as this case proceeds. Thank you.
Mike. Good afternoon, and thank you all for being here today. As Mr. Peace just discussed, Mr. James is now facing a federal charge for his actions, a terrorist attack on mass transit. We have two ways that you can get in contact with us, because I want to be very clear that this is still an ongoing investigation. If you have additional information regarding Mr. James's activity, or if you have digital information, please reach out to us. Contact the FBI, 1-800-CALL-FBI, or you can provide digital media through fbi.gov/Brooklyn shooting. We need to hear from you so we can fully understand all the events that have occurred over the last 30 hours. It's crucial that we receive the assistance of the public as we piece this case together. There has been some reports that FBI holdings to date had a tie to Mr. James. I want to be very clear that to date we have found no record of an investigation of Frank R. James by an FBI office before the shooting yesterday. Reports that FBI's New Mexico field office previously investigated him are inaccurate. I want to thank our partners in this case, the NYPD, the ATF, the U.S. Marshals, and the U.S. Attorney's Office, and all the members of the FBI NYPD Joint Terrorism Task Force. We've had such a tremendous response from all of our partners in this case that have led us to this moment now. I also want to take a quick moment to highlight the work of the JTTF. I'm fortunate I get to work with them every day. It's truly an outstanding group of people, led by SAC Kerry Farley, who spearheaded this investigation. They've done an outstanding job on this, as they have every time New York has faced a threat of this nature. So thank you, and I'd like to turn it over to John DeVito from the ATF.
Good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is John DeVito. I'm the Special Agent in Charge for ATF here in New York State. One of the key points that A. Dick Driscoll pointed out was that we could not have done this without the public's help. First, let me say our thoughts and prayers and actions for the past 2 days have been with the victims as well as all New Yorkers. The men and women of ATF have been working side by side with NYPD, FDNY, the Marshals, FBI to solve this heinous crime, which we have. Immediately after the attack, New York City Crime Gun Intelligence Center, or CJIC, which is a unit comprised of highly skilled analysts, investigators from ATF, NYPD, as well as a myriad of other vital partners, whose sole purpose is to collect, analyze, and disseminate actionable intelligence regarding gun violence. Just imagine a team of dedicated professionals exploiting every nugget of intel from gun violence, the firearms, and then weaponizing that information to use it against the people that are terrorizing our communities. That's your CJ. The timeline on this gun's life spans 16 years in 5 states. And I'm very proud to say that late yesterday evening, about 12 hours after this attack, ATF agents were able to close the loop on that extensive time span and determined that Frank James purchased said firearm from a federal firearms licensee in Ohio in 2011. So essentially, we tied that gun, utilizing the shooting, to our target, and now we have our target in custody. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to be in that we've told you almost everything we have to say, able to answer some very limited questions. Tina.
Can you tell us a little bit about the Crime Stoppers? There's some reports he called himself in. Is that true?
There was a person who called Crime Stoppers. We're reviewing who exactly made that call.
Rocco?
Commissioner, we'll repeat that for another one. He alludes in one of his videos to yesterday's date. Does that date have any significance? And is it clear yet what the motivation was for the shooting?
I think first and foremost, we were looking to get this guy off the street before he did any more carnage, brought any more carnage to the city. As to the investigation into the motive and to look and scouring his social media, that's still part of the ongoing investigation. But again, first and foremost, we wanted to take him off the street. The investigation is continuing into the motive, into his social media postings.
Bloomberg.
You said Mr. James walked you to a Park Slope subway station. What time was that, and what was he doing in between then and when you guys called him?
That was 9:15 yesterday. So the incident occurs at 8:24. So he exited the 25th Street Station House shortly after 8:24. The R train pulls in. We catch him next going into a Park Slope on 7th Avenue and 9th Street at 9:15. And then we grab him today. But we had literally hundreds of detectives out scouring video throughout the crime scene and beyond.
And so this is 9 a.m.?
Excuse me?
9 a.m. that he goes into Park Slope?
Yes, that was him. Yesterday at 9:15.
All right, Mark.
And do you have any idea where he was previously today? Any ideas on his whereabouts? Was he being tracked in any way? Did he say anything when he was arrested?
No, his arrest was just literally minutes ago. So he's just arrived at the precinct shortly. As to his whereabouts, that's part of the investigation. Detectives are out going through video canvases, and we're going to backtrack that, and that will take literally weeks.
Katie.
A two-part question. The first is, did the NYPD previous to yesterday's attack have any complaints, or did they look into any of the cameras being out, not just at 36th Street, but at 45th and 25th? And additionally, is there any indication that Mr. James was going to do any more attacks in New York City?
Well, we'll get back down to cameras after the second part.
Yeah, as far as them doing any more attacks, that's part of the investigation. Our main focus was to take him off the street immediately.
And do you know how?
Go ahead.
Do you know how he purchased the gun? If he had a criminal record?
You can't have a felony conviction to purchase the gun, so he had no felony convictions.
Okay, New York one.
Emily, how are you?
Hi.
Has the mayor's security detail been returned to its typical size and scope?
So we're not going to discuss that. Julia Pop.
Yes, can you take us from the Crime Stopper tip to the arrest? What happened in between? How was he located? And
the Crime Stopper tip today?
Yeah.
Go ahead, boss.
Hey, Juliet. Good afternoon. Crime Stopper tip comes in, reports that the male is in the McDonald's on 6th Street and 1st Avenue in the 9th Precinct down on the Lower East Side in East Village. Officers respond to the McDonald's. He's not in the McDonald's. They start driving around the neighborhood looking for him. They see him on the corner of St. Mark's and 1st, and they take him into custody. No incident in taking him into custody.
Did NYPD do an audit of cameras at subway stations just to make sure that they're all working in the future, so it would be easier to catch a person who does something like this?
Yeah, so the camera systems in the subway system are not NYPD cameras. They're owned and maintained by the MTA. We have access to them. We do regularly look and see which cameras are working, which ones are not, but the responsibility for those cameras belongs to the MTA.
Tony. Are you going to make the officers who made the apprehension available? Are you going to identify them or any special
Not at this time. If we do, we'll let you know.
Rocco.
For Chief Justice, Chief, in interviews that took place throughout the day yesterday with any of the surviving victims as well as people who were on the train, have you been able to glean anything about what he said or did on the train that yields a little bit more about his motivation, about what he intended to do?
We have witnesses on the train who said he was sitting in the back corner of the second car and he popped the smoke grenade. And we have one witness who says, what did you do? He goes, oops, and then he pops the two, brandishes the firearm, and fires 33 times. That we are in the process, and we are asking for anybody's help who is on that subway train or on that platform to reach out to the Crime Stoppers at 1-800-877-TIPS with any information. We're still looking for witnesses and anybody who has information who was on the scene.
Okay, New York Times.
Hi, can you tell us anything more about the block that this guy used? We heard initially that it had jammed. I know from what experts say that clocks aren't supposed to do that. It's kind of one of the selling points of clocks. Can you tell us a little bit more about if that's the case or?
Well, our crime scene is still processing that scene. It goes to the lab, and they'll give us a report. It's still very early in the investigation for that.
All right, Tony.
One for Mr. Restraint. The statute he's being held under, that requires no nexus to any foreign terrorism. This is, in its own, it's a discrete terrorism charge.
That's correct. The statute is titled Terrorism and Other Violent Attacks in Mass Transportation. So if there's a federal interest, of course, in protecting mass transportation hubs and infrastructure, and so that's the jurisdiction. But we're not going to comment further, or we're still investigating the motive and things like that, so can't comment further.
All right, last question to Juliet.
Yes, we can talk about his contact with social services, or if he had any here in New York.
That's going to be part of the investigation as well, so we were not able to speak to that at this moment.
So after his arrest in the 90s, and then did he disappear? Did he?
Investigation as well, Julie. Thank you.
One more question. Use 12.
You're the last question.
Thank you. I'm wondering if there's, do we have any motive in terms of Sunset Park? Why Sunset Park, or was it random?
No idea. So just to close, we also want to acknowledge our partners, sometimes jousting partners in the media, for putting all these pictures out, for spreading this story from the time we did the press conference yesterday. That was a critical effect on raising the kind of public awareness that, as the commissioner said.
And there you have it, Commissioner John Miller thanking the media for its very minor role in trying to get the word out on this suspect. About 29 hours from the incident on that New York City subway to the arrest in Manhattan just a short time ago, Frank James, 1:42 p.m. this afternoon, arrested on the east side of Manhattan in New York's East Village. There had been a call that came in to the Crime Stoppers unit, a witness having seen him in a McDonald's or there in the vicinity. When they got there, the NYPD going through the neighborhood, finding him on the street. They say they took him into custody without incident. They did reveal, and here are the images that came in a short time ago showing that arrest. There are connections. Frank James has connections to Wisconsin, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and New York City. They said 9 prior arrests in the 90s here in New York. He's 62 years old. You heard the mayor there, Eric Adams, who is recovering from COVID. He's at Gracie Mansion via Zoom or some other similar technology, saying, we got him, we got him. He went on to thank New Yorkers, the ones who called in with the tips, and also the ones who stayed there on the scene, on the subway platform and in the train car to help those who'd been shot on that subway train. And in a chilling detail that was revealed just a short time ago here, They revealed that the suspect, Frank James, was able to get off that train in the middle of that chaos and get on the R train at that same subway station. If you remember yesterday, if my memory serves me correctly, the R train then got out of that station to protect other passengers. Now we have learned that the suspect actually got onto another train at that station, particularly perhaps that same train that rushed out of the station. That's how he escaped the scene, but found again, as I mentioned, 29 hours later. Our reporters standing by have been working this story from the start. Aaron Katursky, who has incredible contacts within law enforcement here in New York City. Aaron, you learned before we even went on the air that this would be a federal terror-related charge here.
And it's going to be, at least for now, David, one count of violating a law that makes it a crime to commit a terrorist or violent act on mass transit. And this one certainly qualifies. And I've just been reading through the criminal complaint. It's amazing how much information law enforcement's been able to find out in the last, 28 hours since this attack occurred, from the time that this arrest was made. They've tracked him to a number of different states. As you said, they searched an apartment in Philadelphia. They recovered an extended capacity magazine, a smoke canister like the ones that were set off on the subway, and they also detail some of the statements attributed to James posted on social media. They don't outline a motive, and police did not there in the news conference, but they did highlight some statements made against the mayor, made against homeless people that are living in the subway, and also statements that he made just complaining, a number of irrational rants that were found on YouTube and attributed to Frank James, mentioned there in the criminal complaint. If he's convicted on just this one charge, he would face up to life in prison.
Yeah, the potential for life in prison. And Aaron, you reported it was the credit card found at the scene that helped connect them to the U-Haul. They also revealed there moments ago that it was also the key to that U-Haul, in addition to what they discovered once they found that vehicle, and helping to make sure that they had the right guy here.
And it was amazing. Then they had his car, they had his phone, we believe, they had his credit card, they know what purchases he was able to make, so they figured out that he had purchased a gas mask on eBay, we're told. That gas mask matched the ones that the eyewitnesses said he had donned in the subway before letting off the smoke grenades and then opening fire on the subway with a Glock 9mm handgun. And they pieced it all together to determine that he was, in fact, the suspect they were looking for. And because they had all of these items that pointed to his identity, they weren't sure how far he could go without a lot of money or a credit card, without a vehicle. And it turns out he did not get far. He was able to board an R train. They see him again in Park Slope in Brooklyn, but it was only just a short while ago that eyewitnesses saw him wandering around the East Village in Manhattan. They found him on St. Mark's Place and First Avenue. A bystander snapped a picture, posted it to social media. The NYPD Patrol Bureau ended up descending on that neighborhood and took him into custody.
Aaron Katursky with us here. We really appreciate your and the entire team's reporting on this for the last 24 hours. Aaron, thank you. Another detail that they revealed there from a witness on that train inside that subway car, saying that he was fumbling. He was in the corner of that train car when he dropped something and said, oops, if you will, or some version of that. And that was actually the gas canister that he was pulling out of the bag. He then unleashed the smoke. I should call it a smoke canister, the smoke filling the train. You can see the confusion. People not even sure what was going on, what they were hearing, and then ultimately realizing these were gunshots. That's when he began opening fire right after that cartridge fell at first, as he began to unleash his plan inside that subway car. I want to go to Janae Norman, who's been on the scene in Brooklyn since yesterday morning. And Janae, you were reporting in already relief there at the scene.
Yes, David, there's absolutely relief here near the 36th Street station where this all unfolded yesterday. We're starting to see school letting out here, so we're seeing young kids. I saw a mom with 4 young kids walking. It was a mom I saw yesterday, and when I saw her, I said, you know, they caught him, and she said, I know. She touched her heart, reached to the sky. She said, thank God. It's that kind of relief in this neighborhood, David. It's like the pizza parlor right next door to the subway station where we saw law enforcement swarming yesterday morning, right in the aftermath as this was just beginning to be investigated investigated, looking for surveillance video. I talked to a manager there. He hadn't yet heard the news. I said, did you hear that Frank James is in custody? He paused, he smirked, shook his head almost in disbelief, and he said, wow, that's good news. And it was a similar reaction to a young woman at the bagel shop next door who said she was here yesterday and saw police officers and ambulance showing up. They had to be evacuated as the investigation was started. She told me she was scared getting on the subway this morning because remember, the 29-hour-long manhunt, that meant not only yesterday's rush hour when this all started in the morning, but the evening rush hour, this morning's rush hour. She said she was scared coming to work. We were interviewing her when I said, how do you feel now knowing that the suspected shooter has been captured? She hadn't heard the news. She said, really? They caught him. It's a relief, David. That is what they feel in this neighborhood.
Yeah, Janae Norman delivering the news there from storefront to storefront before they can even learn on their own. I'm sure they are extraordinarily relieved. Our thanks for your incredible reporting as well. One last question before we go here to Pierre Thomas, our Chief Justice correspondent. And Pierre, I took note there that the FBI made a point of saying this investigation is far from over. They continue to need the public's help here. And as we know, and they alluded to this, they're going to be scouring all of these social media posts that they've just begun to look at. And you've reported for some time now, for many months, they were concerned about lone wolves who were unstable in this country.
David, that is the profile that law enforcement officials have been concerned about for so long. And this is a classic case of how police work together to solve this case. David, I was struck by the fact it's items left behind. The gun, the 9mm handgun that was left behind, they were able to trace that to an Ohio purchase in 2011. It had Frank James' name on it. So the serial number on that gun led directly back to him. And those fireworks left behind. They found out he bought the fireworks. And as you pointed out, the U-Haul truck rental, all that information, the credit card information, all pointed to Frank James, and that's why he's off the streets right now.
All right, Pierre Thomas with us as well. Thank you, Pierre. Our coverage will continue on ABC News Live and abcnews.com. Again, the major headline, Frank James arrested 1:42 p.m. here in New York City to great relief of New Yorkers. I'm David Muir here in New York. I'll see you with the entire team from World News Tonight a little later this afternoon. Until then, good day.
Continuing our coverage here on ABC News Live. On an arrest in the New York City subway shooting, police say suspect Frank James was taken into custody without incident. New York City Mayor Eric Adams joining a press conference remotely with the announcement.
My fellow New Yorkers, we got him. We got him. 33 shots, but less than 30 hours later, we're able to say, we got him. Thank you, Commissioner, for your leadership and job well done.
We have live team coverage with a number of ABC News correspondents and ABC News contributors. Let's start with Janae Norman, who's on the scene there in Brooklyn where this subway shooting happened, a little more than 30 hours ago, Janae, and now finally some relief on the streets from those New York City residents.
Absolute relief in this neighborhood, Kenneth. We're right outside the 36th Street station. This was ground zero for this 29-hour manhunt that began in the morning rush hour yesterday and then continued through the evening rush hour yesterday and then this morning still until Frank James was captured not too long ago. As we're seeing school letting out and seeing young kids in school buses, there was a mom crossing the street with 4 young children. She was a mom I saw yesterday. She smiled at me and I told her, you know, they caught him. She said, I know. She touched her heart, pointed to the sky, and she said, thank God, Kenneth. So there is that kind of relief. And as the news was trickling down, because, you know, we heard from officials, but the news still had to get to the people who were here still on edge, not knowing when this manhunt would be over. So I went to the pizza parlor right next door to the subway entrance, and that's where we saw so many law enforcement officials yesterday swarming as they were looking for surveillance video as this investigation was starting. I spoke with the manager, and I said, did you hear that they caught him? He paused, he smirked, shook his head almost in disbelief, and very, very concisely he said, wow, that's good news. And I spoke with a woman who worked at a bagel shop next door. She told me she was here yesterday morning and terrified as she saw people running from the subway station, saw the police cars and the ambulance first beginning to arrive. They had to evacuate yesterday. She told me she had fear taking the subway into work this morning because this manhunt was still going on. And Kenneth, we have her reaction on camera. As I said, how do you feel now knowing that Frank James is in custody? She hadn't heard the news. She paused. She said, did they really catch him? him, and she said that is a relief. And Kenneth, I just want to point out, as we hear more details about how this all unfolded, you know, when something like this happens, law enforcement will say, if you see something, say something, contact us, anyone who has any information. We already knew yesterday that they were able to get an image of the suspect from cell phone video taken by a bystander. Now we're hearing that it was a Crime Stoppers tip, and another image from a bystander today who helped get Frank James in custody. That goes to show you how much when you saying something, when you see something, helps.
That's right, and New York City officials say James was originally spotted in a McDonald's there in the East Village, and then when police responded to that scene, they did not spot him there, and they drove around the neighborhood, and then they were able to locate him. Our Chief Justice correspondent, Pierre Thomas, as Janae was mentioning, Pierre, some relief for the people of New York City, but the investigation continues, and we heard some new details there from that press conference.
Indeed. One of the main lines of the investigation continuing involves the social media posts. There's a wealth of material, and they're hoping that they can better understand perhaps motive, but he is described as incredibly angry in the posts that they've seen so far. He's angry at the mayor. He's angry about homelessness. He's just plain angry, as one source told me. Also, there's some racist comments allegedly made by him, sexist comments allegedly made by him. So there are questions as to his mental health. Was he a person spiraling downhill toward a violent act in this particular case? So that is a key part of the investigation now that he's in custody. But here's the thing that's so fascinating about this case. The amount of material left at the scene proved critical to resolving this case. The gun. Left the gun at the scene, the 9mm handgun. When they traced the serial number on the gun, they found it was purchased by Frank James, allegedly, in Ohio in 2011. That is a major break in the case right there. When they looked at the purchase of the rental of the U-Haul truck found 3 blocks from the incident, boom, that comes back to Frank James as well. The fireworks, they find out that's, purchased by him as well. So this has been a case of items left behind, and then the public, once they were engaged with the pictures and the photographs and the videos, then they could play a role in bringing this man to justice.
The police commissioner saying we were able to shrink his world quickly. There was nowhere for James to turn. Investigative reporter Aaron Katursky. We also learned that hundreds of detectives scoured over video over the past 30 hours.
And that was crucial, and that you can see what they've turned up. All of these images that you're seeing on the screen have come from different security cameras, in addition to prior mugshots, it seems. But they were able to get images of Frank James on the subway station in Brooklyn, where they believe he entered the system, and where he exited, just one stop from the shooting scene. And from there, he seems to have made his way around to a different part of Brooklyn, from Sunset Park to Park Slope. That's the last police hear from him until later on, just about 2 hours ago or so, when people in the East Village at St. Mark's Place and First Avenue saw someone that looked like the suspect, as police had put out photos and images hours earlier. Somebody heads up, calls in, others post these pictures online. The NYPD Patrol Bureau catches them on social media, and then they move in to make the arrest. A heads-up public and good old-fashioned police work, as Pierre suggests, Kenneth, because they didn't have his car, he didn't have his credit card, he didn't have his phone, so all of the electronic methods that police would usually use to track down suspects were not available. They had to do this the old-fashioned way.
And the timeline here of the incident, 8:24 a.m., and then at 9:15 spotted on cameras again. What does this say to you about the fact that, we talked a lot yesterday, Aaron, as you know, about the cameras not working. We thought that they were, investigators would be able to use cameras from that subway station to literally track him immediately. But they were able to pick him up on a later camera.
They were. So in the end, maybe it didn't matter that these cameras weren't working, and many of them are only facing the turnstiles, not the platforms, because more often than not, they're interested in fare evaders, not necessarily what occurs on the platform. They do have plenty of imagery of him, and the criminal complaint that charges him with violating a federal law that makes it illegal to create a terrorist or violent situation on mass transit includes a timeline with images where they see him coming into the system, where they see him exiting, and what he's wearing. He was carrying a roller bag at one point. He was wearing a construction helmet that he appears to have discarded somewhere in a garbage bin along the way. They find the construction vest that he was wearing. They also seem to have recovered the gas mask that eyewitnesses said he donned before releasing smoke canisters. And even during the course of the investigation, according to the criminal complaint, they searched an apartment in Philadelphia associated with James where they found additional rounds of ammunition. They found smoke canisters like the ones set off in the subway.
And speaking of the subway, let's go back to Janae Norman. Janae, we saw Governor Kathy Hochul and other city officials posting images on social media of them riding the New York City subway yesterday evening. You mentioned on ABC News Live yesterday that people still had the evening rush to go through as well, so they were on edge. I know you talked about relief moments ago, but on that scene where you are right now, is this a thing where people are still thinking about the safety of the New York City subway?
Well, you know, Kenneth, there's not only the sense of relief here, but let's talk about the resilience of New Yorkers. The fact that as this investigation was ongoing yesterday and for 29 hours until shortly ago, there was the evening rush hour, there was the morning rush hour this morning, and New Yorkers still had to get to where they had to get to, Kenneth. So they were still on the subways, knowing that this shooter, that Frank James, was still out there and had not yet been captured. And to hear that he ended up in the aftermath of all of the chaos yesterday, getting back on another train, as New Yorkers did have that fear, did have that apprehension, but still were getting on the subways. Right behind me, we've been watching people coming and going. And Kenneth, I want to show you on the ground as we talk about the resilience of New Yorkers. Some of them are trying to skate around it. There are these colorful signs here. One of them says, "Together we will not let the devil darken our sunset," because this is the Sunset Park neighborhood of Brooklyn. There's another one that says, "You may try to kill us, but you will never kill our New York spirit." That New York spirit that you hear about of New Yorkers who usually aren't fazed by too much. And that reminds me of the pizza parlor manager who I talked to, who, you know, when law enforcement swarmed there yesterday, wanted to see the video to see how that could help the investigation. And when I told him, you know, they caught him, and he had the very kind of muted reaction and just said, "Wow, that's good news." That's what it is. It's good news, and New Yorkers are just going to keep keeping on, Kenneth.
We will never let the devil darken our sunset. I think that is something for all of us to use. Janae, thank you so much. Let's turn to Councilman Kalman Yeager, who represents that area, that community where this horrific attack happened. Councilman, thank you for being back here with us on ABC News Live. We spoke with you yesterday when the manhunt was ongoing, and now there is a suspect in custody. Your reaction?
Well, it's an incredible day for New York. First of all, New Yorkers can breathe a sigh of relief. You know, our subway system, if not as safe as it once was, at least we know that this maniac is no longer walking around the streets of New York and riding our subways. And that's something that should give a lot of folks in New York that sigh of relief, that knowing that they can go about their day. I mean, I think we heard today that there was a dip in folks getting on the subways, and I'm certain that as the numbers are looked at for that particular line, we'll see that there was a dip. So, you know, giving people the chance to just really know that this is gone off their radar, I think that's really great.
And first, your reaction. Yeah, sure. I'm sorry. Go right ahead.
No, I think it's also important to note that, you know, it's not just an incredible investigative work by the NYPD and partner agencies, city, state, and federal over the last 30 hours, but ultimately, this guy was caught because a New Yorker picked up the phone and called it in. And that's the most important takeaway I think we can take from all of this.
And that was going to be the question I was going to ask you, and I knew you were going to get to it, which was the fact that there was quick investigative work by the police, but you also had some eagle-eyed New York City residents who helped capture this suspect.
Yeah, I mean, this is exactly what we mean when we say, when you see something, say something. Just don't just say it. You know, say it loud, pick up the phone, make the call it in. You never know. Err on the side that you really did see something important. Don't just go, well, you know, who knows, maybe I was wrong. Let the police make that judgment call. The guy who picked up the phone and made that call and sent the cops to that McDonald's, and those cops who then drove around the block and found them just a block or two later, That's exactly old-fashioned police work. Cops got a tip, they followed up on the tip, and this was all done within a matter of minutes.
As far as from where you sit there on the council, being a council member who represents that community, where does this go next for you?
Well, look, I mean, I think, although I don't represent the subway stop where it happened, as we discussed yesterday, the line that goes through it goes through the neighborhood that I do represent. The council has obviously very diverse voices. There are voices like mine who think that we need more cops on the subway. And I know the debate will be, well, cops wouldn't have stopped this. Well, maybe not, because if there was a cop on the subway, on that particular car at that particular moment, would this person have done that? And even if he would he have gotten off more than one shot? And I think we have to talk in those stark terms that, look, this guy shot his gun 33 times. He shot 10 people. How many shots would he have been able to get off if a cop saw it, was there, pulled out his own weapon, and took him down? We have to talk in those stark terms.
And thank you for clarifying about the area there and the community you represent there, and as you mentioned, the line going through there. When it comes to, obviously transit safety, there are a lot of questions now that the suspect is in custody, and as we learn a motive here, which is still under investigation. We talked about police officers and cameras and other things. Are there other solutions here that should be considered?
Well, look, I mean, I think part of this starts from, we know that the perpetrator had a criminal record. I think it's important to, and this will come out as a background is released to the press of what this particular criminal record was. Whether or not we are allowing repeat offenders back on the street. Now, I'm saying this and very carefully saying I don't know enough to tell you that this particular person is somebody who is a repeat offender who was let back on the streets. But I think we have seen over the last several years that heinous crimes are committed by people who have a record of repeatedly committing heinous crimes and repeatedly let back on the street. And that's why I'm very, very, very grateful that the federal government is taking on this case. This individual is going to be prosecuted by the U.S. Attorney for violating federal crime, for committing federal crimes, and not by the state system, because frankly, I think New Yorkers have a good reason to have lost confidence in the ability of state prosecutors to take bad guys off the streets.
All right, Councilman Yeager there in New York City, we really appreciate your time. Thanks again.
Thank you. Stay safe.
And let's turn to NYPD and former NYPD Detective Mark Claxton. Mark, let me get your thoughts on the fact that we see and we heard that the suspect, James, 9 prior arrests in New Jersey, an extensive criminal record here dating back to the early 90s. Your thoughts?
Well, I'm sure the city's breathing a sigh of relief. The investigators, the administration is breathing a sigh of relief. However, the successful prosecution will be the sign of success. And I think what is happening now is that the investigators who spent the last 30 hours or so trying to track down this elusive individual now have to continue the investigation and try to obtain additional evidence that can support a successful prosecution, because it'll all be for naught if we're not able to successfully prosecute and incarcerate the individual. But it is a hugely successful operation. It is a testament to the collaborative work of federal, state, city authorities. It also pays a lot of respect to old traditional gumshoe detective work for all of the technology and access to technology that the investigators have. A lot of times it's doing the more traditional work, the grunt work, if you will, that will lead to the best results. And it is successful, and along with the encouraging people, this really supports encouraging people to be more involved and proactive about fighting crime.
And from what you know as being a former NYPD detective, what happens next after he was taken into custody? Understand that he is at a local precinct. What next steps are taken with investigators?
Sure, what they're doing is compiling all the available evidence that they have right now. There may be an opportunity for an interview or an interrogation, if you will. in hopes of gaining more information, detailed information from the perpetrator himself. They are lining up all of their ducks in a row in order to prepare for this, the long haul, which is the prosecution. So the investigators right now are still in investigative mode. They're trying to get additional information. You may have people now who are more willing to come forward with some information that they have now that the suspect is in custody, whereas yesterday they may have been a little bit tentative or hesitant to do so. So I'm sure there will be additional information which will add to establishing a clear timeline of the perpetrator's movements. So it's a lot of information gathering at this point and putting it all together in a way that preserves the integrity of this entire process.
And Brad Garrett, let's talk about that movement as well. We know that the suspect, according to police, had touched on a number of states, or was in a number of states from Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. His criminal record goes back, again, as I mentioned, to the 90s, but New Jersey, Ohio, Pennsylvania also mentioned as part of his criminal record there. Obviously, police looking not only into that record, but tracking his movements in other states as well.
Well, there's no doubt, because think about what he's been initially charged with, which is a federal crime that has to have some sort of interstate nexus. You had the head of ATF in the New York area talk about tracing the firearm, the Glock 9mm with the extended magazine found in or near the scene, was purchased in Ohio back, I believe, in 2011. The fireworks, which are not probably going to be a violation, but they were used in this quote-unquote terrorist act in the subway system, also becomes relevant where they were purchased. Because you have to, besides showing interstate, you're going to have to show intent. You know, what was Mr. James's intent? Now, obviously, we know what he did, but all of those things go together as you put together a federal case that a federal prosecutor then can articulate facts that match the federal statute. And so there's going to be a lot of that going on. NYPD will help with that, obviously, and the FBI in Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Wisconsin will work with the federal prosecutors in New York to pull all those facts together by the time that they ever get to a trial, if in fact we have a trial in this case.
And Aaron, we talk about the investigative efforts here and the key moments in the investigation, and finding out where that gun was purchased in Ohio, I believe in 2011, was also key.
Finding the gun with his name in 2011, purchased at a pawn shop in Ohio. They have his purchase of fireworks that the Phantom fireworks said were purchased near Racine, Wisconsin. They have a purchase of a gas mask similar to the one that eyewitnesses saw him wearing on the subway prior to the shooting, and that was purchased on eBay. So they were looking through his credit card purchases after they found the credit card on the subway platform after the shooting, and they were tying all these pieces together to give them confidence that this was the suspect that they were looking for. But finding him after that really relied on the heads up that they gave the public, and they put the images out there for the public to see. And when he was spotted in the East Village here in Manhattan, that's when police were able to move in and make the arrest.
Yet, Aaron, as you know, police are still asking for information from the public. They want to know, and they want to hear from witnesses on that train and in that subway station.
They want to hear from witnesses because they want to develop the fullest possible picture. We've had a look at the criminal complaint with the one charge that the U.S. attorney says he'll face for now. They'd like to fill that out as much as possible. Additional charges are in the offing. It's quite possible he'll also face state-level charges from the Brooklyn DA's office if they want to go that route for the attempted murder of 10 people on the subway. So they still want to piece together all of his movements. But in the initial hours, Kenneth, the criminal complaint makes clear they were able to track him all around Brooklyn and then into Manhattan. They also were able to check out addresses associated with him in other states, including one in Philadelphia, where they searched an apartment smoke canisters, ammunition found there. So they're going to take a detailed look now into his history as they work to develop a motive.
And Tom Bossert, as we talk about those federal charges, there was a detail that was mentioned during that news conference with city and federal officials about the reason we're seeing the federal charges is because this happened on mass transit.
Yeah, the specific reference was to this particular statute, this 1992 7A. You know, there was a very specific charge laid out. It's the underlying, statutory authority they have to bring this federal charge. It's meant to protect against violent or terrorist acts in or against transit systems. Such a very soft target, and so we picked up on that. It was interesting that the federal charges were laid out with so much detail. I was glad to hear it, but what I am looking for is those state charges that your last speaker alluded to. I think, in fact, you're going to find that those end up being some of the more easy to prove, and perhaps even the longer sentences will attach. You know, I think it's a 25-year sentence for attempted murder in New York. You can serve those sentences consecutively instead of concurrently with 10 people. 10 times 25 years is a very long time. And I hope that those charges stick because they're a lot simpler. It seems to me, and of course we'll go through our legal process, that the intent was there. This was premeditated and pre-planned. Very difficult to make any other argument other than the intent to murder when you start shooting indiscriminately at close range in a subway car. And then in terms of his mental illness, I've heard this raised a few times. He might not be well in a lot of ways and in a colloquial sense. But when you get into a courtroom and you have to prove whether this individual, this Frank James suspect, or, I guess I'll hesitate to, alleged shooter, right? But it seems pretty clear. This guy had an understanding of what he was doing as wrong. And you can't argue that he didn't know the difference from right and wrong. He left, he fled, he tried to evade arrest. He pretty clearly evidenced with his own behavior guilty intent, guilty knowledge, and the awareness and presence to then go and run and hide. So I think there's going to be a straightforward case made very cleanly and very neatly that there was at least 10, if not more, attempts at attempted murder. And, thank God it didn't end up with actual murder. This is a miracle. It's a good day. I'm glad we caught him. But the federal charges and terrorism charges, I'm all for it, and I hope they're tacked on. But I think you'll end up following this story through the state courts as well.
All right, Tom, thank you. Thanks to you and to everyone who joined our live team coverage here. Again, the #1 priority for police, they say, was to get this suspect off the street. And now the motive still under investigation. And the attention also turns to the safety of mass transit, not only in New York City, but across this country. That does it for us at this hour. I'm Kenneth Moton. Thanks for joining us. Remember, ABC News Live is here for you all day with the latest news, context, and analysis. And if you need to know where to find us, we're on all your devices, plus the ABC News app and on abcnews.com. The news continues right after this.